Good.
Yes, very good jokes. All right. My name is Chris, Darren, as I said already, and I'm presenting a game called Organ Grinder, which at its very core is essentially a game about a man on the back of a giant mechanical golem he controls by playing an organ set into the golem's back. I know it sounds random right now, but let me start at the beginning. So the world was flooded over completely, and in humanity's darkest hour, a strange plan was set into motion. A city was built encased in a dome of glass, like a snow globe, and set onto a slow-moving airship to fly above the clouds, above where the water, which now covers all inhabitable land on the Earth. And by the way, this concept art is from Google Image Search, so don't take it too far. This is a little bit more of what the city ends up looking like. So think of the city almost like a Noah's Ark story. This is the last remnants of mankind itself. And so, thank you, Ron. These are the last remnants of mankind itself. And so the goal for this is merely for these people to survive long enough for the world to become inhabitable again. They're not meant to get at the controls or handle anything about the ship. So in fact, the people are simply meant to live here, separated by classes on these discs, with the lowest class at the bottom and the richest class at the top. And merely to live long enough such that we can again inhabit the Earth. And in order to do this, the city is set with perfect equilibrium. The ship's controls are managed by the clock tower in the very center, as you see, that intersects all of the discs inside the city. The clock tower is constant ticking motion, and the steadiness of the pendulum is what controls the ship very steadily, and there's a reason for that. You see, because just having a bunch of people up in the sky isn't good enough. Higher altitudes means colder temperatures. The peaks of Mount Everest are constantly below sub-zero. And so the only way for this floating greenhouse to survive is for the people to always stay in the light. And so the steady motion of the ship is actually so that the city will always follow the sun around the globe and never be in the dark where they would surely die. Even that wasn't quite enough to settle the minds of the crafters of this city, because they also feared social uprising, which makes sense. If anything goes awry, if people start killing each other for any reason, things become unstable inside here. That will be the end of mankind, pure extinction. And so the controls for the clock tower, or the controls for the clock tower, and likewise for the ship, are at the very top of the clock tower. And the clock tower itself is filled with automatons and various traps to keep people from getting into the inside, into the nitty-gritty. And likewise, the people who are at the very bottom of the city are the ones furthest from the controls, because the crafters of the city fear that the poorest people will be the ones most likely to revolt. And this is where we enter the protagonist, although with a quick brief aside. See, the clock tower is actually based on a conglomeration of many different styles of clock. And one of the main inspirations for it is the Swedish chalet style, which is, you've all seen them before. They're the ones with the little figurines that dance around by the hour and play little musical ditties. This clock tower as well also has figurines that pop out on every floor. And the greatest of these was Atlas, the figurine at the very top of the clock tower, the one lone figurine who symbolically carried the world on his back. And once a day, he would dance up at the top. The crafters of the city, though, didn't plan on the city having to thrive like this for very long. And over time, wear occurred. And Atlas himself actually fell from the top of the clock tower down into the disc right below, where the rich people are. And the rich people at this point didn't really care anymore. Generations had passed. So they dumped him to the disc right below them. And so he kept falling until he reached the bottom disc where all the poor people are and where all the junk ends up. Down there at the very bottom, Atlas might have been forgotten, if not for Quasimodo, a young man who had been disabled since birth. Quasimodo was an organ grinder. He was a musical savant. All he wanted to do was play his organ by the street corners, and even though he made barely a livable wage with it, that was what made him happy. But when he discovered Atlas down there, Atlas at this point, it was basically junk. He realized quickly that Atlas would actually respond to the melodies that corresponded to his dances when he was at the top of the clock tower. And so Quasimodo recognized that by sitting on Atlas's back, he could actually ride around on Atlas. Atlas became mobility for Quasimodo, and Quasimodo gave Atlas a purpose. And he fashioned his organ into Atlas's back, and thus he came to be known as Staccato, the golem. So Quasimodo, I want you to picture a picture of Bob meets Dr. Robotnik. A short, foppish, fuddy-duddy old man. See, at this point where the game is taking place, Quasimodo is no longer a young man. He's now a much older man. And the reason, the inciting incident for this whole event, oh, by the way, that's, the game's not going to be this violent, but it demonstrates a pretty cool concept. The reason for this whole event is that clocks over time become inaccurate. And this clock is no different. Again, many generations have passed. And they didn't think that, the crafters of the city didn't think that it would eventually come to this. And at this point, the clocks become so inaccurate, remember it handles the moving of the ship, that they actually no longer are following the sun, but they see sunset in the distance, which spells certain demise for everyone on the ship, the last remnants of humankind. And so the people on this ship can look out and see death on the horizon, literally, and they recognize that the only way for anyone to change anything about this would be to get at the ship's controls, which is at the very top of the clock tower. And again, it's full of dangerousness. They didn't want anyone getting into it. Quasimodo normally probably wouldn't care too much about this, except for one thing. Staccato, the golem, the one who's carried him around all this time, can often be seen looking up longingly at the top of the clock tower. Quasimodo imagines that Staccato probably is nostalgic for the former glory that he once had at the top there, but that was his real purpose. And so with a mixture of wanting to help his friend, who gave him legs, and wanting to help his people, who listened to his music, Quasimodo and Staccato set off on their journey to travel up the clock tower through dark and deadly device to reach the top and set everything right again. And that's the backdrop of Organ Grinder. Now I want to talk a little bit about art style. The art style is a mixture between Art Deco and steampunk. Here are a couple sample images of steampunk. And Art Deco, which normally isn't paired with steampunk. Normally steampunk's all about being very complicated, and Art Deco is usually about getting a lot out of very simple shapes. Although not all Art Deco looks this simplistic. This is a complicated example of the Art Deco style. All it really means is that there are simple geometric patterns that are being repeated. And there aren't very many instances of Art Deco meets steampunk, but I did find a few. This is one example of what that might end up looking like. And Iron Giant is like classic. I mean, it's practically inspiration at this point. Now I want to get into the mechanics. And remember at the very beginning that I said that this game is about a man who controls a golem by playing an organ set into his back. And I'm serious about that. It's a musical action puzzle sort of RPG. And when I say musical, I don't mean rhythm. There's no rock band, guitar hero-ness about this. And specifically what I mean about that is rock band and guitar hero are about trying to emulate other people's songs. And when you mess up, it plays like little like really annoying noises, you know. They just piss you off. I mean, it's like play the song their way or you don't hear anything at all. This is rather about guiding a player into making something that sounds nice. I've had my MIDI controller, which is sitting right there, out on my desk, like just demoing stuff for this game to see if it was feasible to make a prototype to actually instruct people how to like play simple music. And even while having that MIDI controller out, every time people pass by my desk, they just start hitting away at the keys. Even if I'm doing something, like they'll forego all politeness just to smack some keys. And I'll have my headphones on, they're not even hearing anything. We have this compulsion to try and make music when it's available to us. And it's a natural, understandable human desire. But what usually stops us after we hit a few keys is that we're not making anything that sounds quite right. Or we can't quite remember Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as well as we could when we were a kid. This game, instead, would be a way to let people play around on a keyboard and actually make something that sounds nice by simply guiding them and not punishing them when they don't quite play it quick enough or anything like that. So it's not about rhythm. And of course there might be, when I've been talking about this idea with people, some people express fears about peripherals, and your peripheral options are this. an actual computer keyboard, a lot of audio editing software actually sets it up like this. And a lot of people find this a lot easier than using an actual keyboard. Because although you might not know what C4 is, if I tell you to hit the Z key, you're probably going to find it unless you don't know how to use a computer. And this is a MIDI controller. It's actually identical to the one that I already have. These are actually quite cheap. And one of the interesting things about these is that although on the MIDI controller we don't have the other keys on a keyboard, you know, like the arrows and all that, on a MIDI controller you do actually have these neat little wheels on the left for pitch and modulation and other little controls that can definitely be explored for the game. And finally, the Rock Band keyboard, which actually plugs into any computer and works exactly like a MIDI controller. It's very standardized. So I want to stress that the mechanics of this game, as you're traversing this clock tower, is all about translating simple musical melodies into abilities that the golem uses in order to overcome your obstacles. I don't know how I'm doing it. I guess I can open up questions.